Last week, I took you from start to finish on how to write an entire book with AI, and I used a combination of different tools. But this week, I'm going to tell you how to do it with just one tool, and I'm picking the one tool I think has the most promise, the one that if I could only have one tool, this would be it, and that is Claude, specifically Claude 2, which is accessible through Anthropic and their website that they have for Claude. Let's get into it. All right, we are here in Claude 2. This is the standard chat dashboard that they have. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, this is only still available in the US and the UK, and it is currently free. However, there are a number of caveats to that. Reports are saying that people run into chat limits. They can only do a few chats at a time. Hopefully we don't run into that kind of a limit today. Now, if you watched last week's video, some of this will seem familiar to you. However, we are going to be taking the tactics a little differently based on the way Claude responds. And so if you did watch that video, don't click away because there are going to be new tactics. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a super prompt, which is a method that works really well in Claude, but isn't as usable in other programs. And so we're going to take a look at that. But to start with, we need a story idea, and we're just going to brainstorm one that Claude has available. Let's just say something like, brainstorm for me 10 possible story hooks for a science fiction first contact novel. And that'll be our genre for the day. And it gives us 10 possible story hooks. Scientists detect a strange signal from deep space that appears to be artificial in origin. A team is assembled to investigate and try to decode. A large unidentified flying object is spotted entering the solar system. All right, all of these seemed a little bit general, but of the ones that it gave us, the one that I liked the most was this one. A strange meteor impacts in a remote area, and scientists called to investigate find a mysterious capsule inside that appears to be of alien origin. So we're going to say, I like number 7. Can we brainstorm 10 different endings for a book with that premise? And again, if you watch my previous video, you know the reason I do this is because by having an ending, we're really able to get a much better idea of what should come in the middle, and the AI is able to plot that out much better. So first we want to kind of figure out what that is and go with that. All right. Okay. So you know, I didn't like all of these endings. Like this one here said the capsule contains a message welcoming humanity into galactic alliance of the worlds. Or this one says the capsule cures all diseases overnight. A little bit too, you know, happily ever after, which is typical of AI. But it did give me this one, which was much more interesting. Unfortunately, the capsule contains an aggressive alien virus that escapes and decimates Earth's population. Survivors must start over. And I thought, great, that sounds like some great conflict. Now, that might actually be more of a inciting incident than an ending, but we're just going to run with it as an ending, and just because I think that sounds interesting. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the premise here. We went with number 7, and I'm just going to take it into this Google Doc here. Let's bring that up a little bit. All right. And I'm going to take this ending, list it as ending. Now let me pause here and briefly talk about the super prompt. This is the template that we're going to be using for the super prompt. We have a sample chapter here. We have characters. We have the main outline. We have chapter beats. We have the style, and we have instructions. And I'm going to explain each of these in detail later on, but you'll notice here that we've got this setup where we've got in brackets, we got it saying the thing, in this case, sample chapter. And then in brackets here, we have the same thing, except we put a slash in front of sample chapter. This is a technique I learned from the folks over at Future Fiction Academy, where basically this is a good way of encapsulating different sections in a single prompt so that the AI knows better where a part of your prompt begins and where that part of your prompt ends. And this is really useful in a super prompt like this, where you've got so much data that we're feeding into the AI. We want to make sure it's able to parse that data correctly and understand it very well. And so this is basically a coding thing. And I am not an expert in coding. I know a little bit of HTML, and HTML follows the same kind of pattern where you have a tag in brackets, and then at the end of that thing you have the same tag but with a slash at the end to indicate that it's the end. And AI seems to understand this really well, and so it's a good way of getting it across what it needs to know. We're going to be filling in each of these sections here. And notice I've put the premise and the ending outside of that because we're not actually going to put the premise and the ending in the super prompt yet. What we are going to do is generate all of the other things that we need. And we're going to need characters, we're going to need outline, we're going to need chapter beats. But before we get to that, we need, the premise and the ending and the synopsis. So I'm going to take this, go back into Claude and say, given the following premise and ending, devise a detailed story synopsis that is structured in 3 acts with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Then we're going to say, make sure to include plenty of conflict and include a main character. All right, now I'll paste the premise and the ending and see what it gives us for the synopsis. All right, and it's given us a 3-act synopsis here. This is pretty good. I'm going to take this and just drop it into my document here. But again, we are not yet filling out the super prompt, but we're getting close. And so I've got this here, and we did get the name of a character, Dr. Julia Carter. And so we're going to flesh out her character a little more. Tell me more about Dr. Carter. Include a physical description, her Myers-Briggs personality type, and information about how she responds in at least 3 different types of situations. So we'll wait till we can get some information about Dr. Carter here. All right, we have a nice little synopsis about Dr. Carter. And we'll go ahead, and now we are going to actually start filling out some parts of the super prompt. And in particular, we're going to just put this here under Dr. Carter. And I'm going to delineate this way. We're going to say Dr. Carter is, and then I'm just going to include all of this in one big paragraph just for the AI's benefit. And now I'm going to ask the AI, give me 5 more descriptions in the same, or 5 more characters that are fleshed out in the same way and are important to this story. All right, we got 5 more characters here. Very brief on their descriptions, but that's okay because they're not main characters. I'm just going to pop them into this bit with the other characters. And you'll notice I am not really changing anything about these. And that is mostly because I don't have time in this one video. But ordinarily, you would want to be going through every single one of these and making sure that fits with your vision of the story you're telling. You'll want to do that at every step of the way. And so, for instance, with this synopsis, you would want to go through and make sure the synopsis is everything that you want it to be, because it's going to need that specificity before you get to the outlining stage, because if you are outlining based on a flawed synopsis, the outline is also going to be even more flawed. And so you need to make sure the synopsis is good. And then when you get to the outline, you make sure the outline is good. And then when you get to the story beats, you can see as you're drilling down every single time, you want to be specific and you want to make sure it follows good story structure, make sure it follows your vision. All of those things are important. I'm not doing that because I'm just going through this quickly. And I've actually thought about Let me know in the comments if this is something you'd like to see. I've actually thought about creating a book using nothing but prompting, absolutely no editing once it has given me the results, and actually putting that together and seeing if it would make a coherent book just for the fun of it, and I could make it available for free and everything so anyone could download it and see what happened. So if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, let me know. Maybe we could do that in a series of live streams or something. But in general, you want to be working on this yourself. You want to be validating everything and moving on. So now we now have a list of characters, and we have information about each one of them, including a little bit of their personality type, a little bit about their physical description, all of that stuff. And so the next thing we want to add is the outline, which will go inside these two brackets right here. And so to do that, we're going to combine the characters that we've generated so far and the synopsis. I'm actually going to open up a new chat just so we're starting fresh and the AI isn't tainted by anything that we've generated before. And I'm going to say, given the following character descriptions and story synopsis, generate a detailed outline with 12 chapters based on the 12 steps of the hero's journey as defined by Christopher Vogler. That's just a standard novella-sized chapter outline that I like to do. And then we're going to say characters, and we're going to go here and grab all of the character information that we've done so far. And by the way, one of the nice things about Claude is that it can handle large amounts of data. So I don't really have to worry about how much information I'm putting in here. I can just go ahead and grab everything. And so we're going to just grab the synopsis here and add the synopsis. It already says synopsis here, so it knows that this is the synopsis and these are the characters. And so now that it knows the characters and knows the synopsis, it should be able to generate a decent sized outline with 12 chapters. All right, it's given us a 12 chapter outline. This is actually a pretty decent outline. I was pretty happy with it. So we're going to go ahead and just copy this entire thing, just the outline here, and paste it into this section called outline. So we now have that. And again, if we were doing this properly, we would go through and make sure each chapter is actually what we want to happen in each chapter. But this isn't too bad. So we're fleshing this thing out, right? We now have characters. We now have outline. We're going to completely, from here on, disregard the premise, the ending, and the synopsis. We don't really need that anymore because we have this more fleshed out outline. And we're going to flesh out the rest of these parts of the super prompt. Now, this first one is a sample chapter. This is going to be important to help it recognize your style. Now, if you're starting a brand new book, you don't have a sample chapter from that book yet, obviously. And so you'll want to bring in another chapter from another book you've written. Now, you have to be careful because if you're not careful, it will think that that sample chapter is part of your story. So you need to make sure that it's only analyzing your sample chapter for your prose style. And even if you give it the right guardrails for that, it will still sometimes do it. So that is why when you have chapters written in this book, like say you've completed the first chapter and then you've edited that first chapter to be exactly the way you want it, you can then put that into the sample chapter spot. But since we don't have that first chapter yet, we're going to add our own first chapter or sample chapter. So I preface this with this prompt here, which says, the following is a sample chapter of my writing. Do not use any story information from this chapter, but analyze it for the prose style. We will be using this prose style in instructions, and I made sure to capitalize instructions so it knows that we're talking about this right here when we get to it. And from that, we're going to paste in, I'm just going to paste in a sample chapter of a fantasy book that I've written that was mine. This is not AI generated, and so paste that big long chapter in here. Now you can see where we're calling this a super prompt, because already this is thousands of words long, just mostly from the sample chapter. So scroll up, we have that prompt telling it to only use this for analyzing my style and the way I write. Then we go to the next section which is right here, the characters. We already have the characters all listed out here. We have the outline. Everything in the outline is listed out here. And now it is time to generate our chapter beats. So for the purposes of this video, we're only going to develop the beats of chapter 1, although you could technically put more beats in here if you wanted. But we're just going to call this first chapter here and go into Claude. And we'll say, take the following chapter summary and generate a list of 12 highly detailed action beats for a script with additional story information to fully flesh out the chapter. Make sure to always use proper nouns instead of pronouns. That way we'll make sure the beats are adjusted properly so that the AI always knows who's doing what. And you could add, we can make this 15 beats, we can make it 20 beats, we can make it 6 beats. It's whatever we really want to do. But then I'm going to paste the chapter 1. I'll just say chapter 1 here, so it knows the chapter that we're talking about, and ask it to generate the beats. Now for me personally, this is the part where I spend the most time editing, are these story beats, because it's never quite specific enough in my experience. We can get it halfway there using the AI, but then you're going to need to go in there and massage it and flesh it out a little bit further. Once again, for time, we're not going to do that. But I think I will probably do a video, maybe a live stream or something like that, where I show you my full process and walk you through it for each individual beat. And you'll see just how much work needs to go into it, how much work I usually put into it. But here we go. We've got each of these beats. And interestingly, because I asked it to give it action beats for a script, it's given me locations for each beat. So that's interesting. That actually might help the AI to stay on task. It isn't necessarily what we would want in a finished product, but I'm just going to leave it for now because it's interesting. And usually when you give the AI something that it generated, it understands that really well. So we've got the sample chapter, we've got the characters, we've got the outline. We are now going to plug everything we just generated into the chapter beats here. And I'm just going to read through them real quick so I fully understand what happens in them, because I want to make sure that our AI stays on point when it is writing the prose and is actually sticking to the beats here. Okay, this was interesting reading through it. I had to go back and look at the chapter summary because it says Dr. Julia Carter is introduced as a driven CDC epidemiologist, content in her ordinary routine of researching infectious diseases. Her logical personality and attention to data are established. And it really took this thing of her ordinary routine to heart. And the whole chapter is basically showing a day in the life of this person. There is no conflict whatsoever. There is absolutely nothing but like slice of life stuff. So this is not a way that I would open a chapter because there's no conflict at all. But it was interesting to read through it. And once again, this is why you have to go in there and fix up these beats as you would want to do so. But what I'm more concerned with here, and the reason I'm making this demonstration, is can we write this entire chapter in one go? You know, now that we've got these beats and all of the other information above, we've got the outline and everything, could we just plop this into Claude and just get the entire chapter in one go? That would be pretty amazing. I think you would agree. So now that we have the story beats, we're going to add a style, and I've just got a standard style that I've developed that I'm just going to plop in here. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. I'll just read it through here. We're going to say third person limited, past point of view of Dr. Carter, show don't tell, deep point of view, realistic dialogue, stronger verbs, lots of conflict, drama, and description, avoid mushy descriptions of dialogue. Make sure to write realistic dialogue with the occasional dialogue beat, avoid any cheesy or melodramatic descriptions or dialogue, avoid mushy descriptions, use mixed cadence. So it's kind of a short style prompt, but if you wanted to, you could really, because this is a super prompt, remember, you could put all the style information that you possibly want in this space. This is just something I've used before in Sudowrite, and it works really well for me. And so I'm just going to use that. And then finally, we get to arguably the most important part here, and that is the instructions. And I'm just going to paste in the instructions that I've prepared already for this. And you'll notice I've highlighted a few of these in capital letters because it's referring specifically to sections of the super prompt like style or chapter beats. And so this is what the instructions looks like. Using all of the above information on chapter beats, outline, and characters, write 50,000 words, I'll get to that in a second, of chapter 1. Use the sample chapter and the style to determine the prose style of the chapter you write. Follow the chapter beats closely. All paragraphs should take place during the time frame of the summary instead of adding new events. Focus on fully developing the given story beats rather than rushing to new plot points. End the scenes at the specified story beat rather than continuing further. And then we end the instructions here. So let's break this down a little bit so we have it, gather all the information that we've given it, and I've asked it to write 50,000 words. Now this is what I would say is the secret sauce of this video. I learned this from a couple of people in my Discord. Shout out to the Discord, which you should definitely check out. I've got a link below. But if you ask Claude to give you 50,000 words, it's not going to give you 50,000 words, but it might give you 3,000 words, or even I've gotten as many as 4,000 words before, because you give it some ridiculous number and it does more than it usually would. It stretches. And it gets the idea that we need to fully flesh these beats out and not to rush them, essentially, is what it's getting. Now, this could be a bug that Anthropic fixes in future versions of Claude where you can't do this because it costs them a lot of money every time you generate large chunks of text. And they'll say, oh, people are telling it to do 50,000 words and it's giving them 3,000. We should cut this off. So use this how you will while you can, is all I'm saying. Hopefully it's a feature that remains active, or at the very least is available inside a paywall once Claude figures out what kind of paywall they're going to have, because I'm sure there will be one. But so far, this seems to be working most of the time. About 90% of the times that I've tested it, it's done really well. And then the rest of this, we ask it to use the sample chapter and the style to determine the prose style. And then the rest of this is just necessary because we are working in Claude. ChatGPT would not need this information as much because ChatGPT is good at following orders, but Claude is not. And so we need to tell it to follow the chapter beats closely. We need to make sure it should all take place within the timeline of the summary. We don't want it to add new events. We want it to fully flesh out the given story beats rather than rushing on to new plot points. All of these are different ways of telling it stick to the plan. End the scenes at the specified story beat rather than continuing further. And in fact, I think I will add even further here. I'll go to this last story beat and I'll say end of chapter, so that it knows not to continue on in this chapter past that point. Now, it's not always going to listen, but all of these things are things that people have used. I've experimented with this extensively myself. I've talked to other people in my Discord. All of these are going to help. It's not necessarily always going to result in a perfect chapter, but it's going to be a lot better because of these prompts, and you're going to have a better probability that the output that you get is what you want. All right, now we essentially have our entire super prompt here. So we could go ahead and now we scroll all the way to the top so I can copy this super thing. Let's just quickly take a look at how many words this is. Nearly 5,000 words. Most of that's going to be the sample chapter, but still quite a lot of words here. And now we're going to go to Claude. We are going to open a new chat. Paste the entire thing in with no more instructions because it's all in the instructions, and hit enter. All right, it is finished generating. I had to actually generate this twice because the first time it didn't quite get deep enough and it was still giving a very surface level overview of the chapter, like it was fleshing it out further. But this time we've got a good look at all this text here. So we're going to go ahead and copy this and just go to wordcounter.net and we're going to paste this in. And look at that, 3,000 words in one chat. This is enough to be a fully fleshed out chapter in one single chat from that super chat that we gave it. So if you wanted to continue writing the entire book this way, the only thing you would need to change out of this entire thing, first of all, you might want to replace the sample chapter with something else that is relevant to the story. You could give it chapter 1 or whatever the last chapter is that you generated and fully edited. The characters could remain the same. You might want to swap out different characters depending on which chapter you're in. The outline you can leave the same, and the chapter beats is going to be the only major thing that you're going to change from one super prompt to the next. For each chapter, you're going to want to have a different set of chapter beats, obviously. The style, you can mostly remain the same. You might want to tweak it as you go along to see what you can do. And then there might be a few other things you need to tweak here. Like, for instance, in the instructions, it says write 50,000 words of chapter 1. You change that to chapter 2, chapter 3, and so on. Everything else can remain the same. And so really the only major thing that you're going to do for each chapter is flesh out the story beats of each additional chapter, which can take some time, and that's fine. But this is pretty incredible that we're able to get 3,000 words in one go. And I verified by reading the whole thing that it was still on topic by the end of the thing. It was still following the story beats after 3,000 words. And that, for one, is pretty incredible, because if you were to do this a couple of beats at a time, it would eventually get sidetracked and do other things. But if you give all of the beats at the same time and it writes them all together, it actually does a really good job of sticking to the whole thing. Now, it might go off a little bit at the very end, but overall it has done a phenomenal job here. And so I'm very happy with this, with what it has given us so far. And other than the fact that this was a boring chapter to begin with, but for what it's worth, it wrote that boring chapter really, really well. If we were to have more action, I'm sure it would do really well with that as well. It has done so in my testing. I threw in a couple of my own beats that I had written myself without any AI, which those beats, just pro tip, when you write them yourself, they tend to be a lot better, and the AI is able to get much better output with them. And so I've done that. It was able to do that for me in those tests. And so it's done a really good job here. Now, as I said, I had to generate this twice. So you might have to do that once or twice or 3 times to get to that point that you want. But if we're here, we're in the future, you guys. This is how I would write a book with Claude. If I were only using Claude, I would follow all of the steps that you saw me do today. And the only thing that I wouldn't do in Claude would be to do some of the writing and the editing and the validating of the story beats and so forth myself. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you in the next video.